Hi there, this is Manish Vijay from PM Pulse and we bring to you the very first episode of Agile Ninja series. The whole purpose of starting this channel is to remove the myths around Agile. Unfortunately, the consultants, the different organizations, the way the books have been written have actually confused people more than enabling them in Agile. Agile is a great thing provided you do it correctly. Unfortunately, 80 to 90% of all Agile implementations among some of the best companies on the planet are incorrect or at best partially correct. And therefore, people are suffering, people are wanting to go into Agile, people are talking a lot academically, but what they're delivering is not really up to it. Therefore, this series is only to remove all kinds of myths around Agile and also to make sure that you understand the basic concepts of Agile before we get into pretty serious subjects around Agile. And therefore, this particular video is only dedicated to one thing, and that is the different methodologies. I'm going to give you a short introduction about the different methodologies of project management. People are thinking that PMI and PMP are synonymous to project management. So if you have another institute which actually talks about Agile, that's an alternate to project management, and that's the worst mistake people can make. Absolutely incorrect. Project management is a system which has multiple methodologies within it. There is no one way of doing project management. That's the biggest mistake people think. Project management is a system. PMBOK does not show you a methodology. It is a system. And therefore, you need to apply different methodology within that system to achieve these specific project objectives within the constraints that you face, or the kind of business or line of business or the domain that you're working within. Agile is one of those methodologies. I'm going to cover some of the most popular methodologies which people confuse with. One is waterfall, the other one is iterative, the third one is incremental, and the last one is agile. I'm not going to, however, discuss what is agile in this particular video. I'm going to save that for the very next video. All right, let's talk about the very first methodology, the most common one, which you might have heard of. And a lot of people think that it's outdated, it's old school. No, that's not true. Even today, most of the projects on the planet happen using this methodology, and it's called waterfall, predictive methodology. Why do we call it predictive? And why do we call it waterfall? Predictive simply means that you can predict what the final outcome is because the requirements are very clear. Government regulations or construction industry projects, traditional projects, steel industry projects, manufacturing projects, all of these projects have a very clear scope and have a very clear requirements because it does not allow changes. Of course, it allows changes, but at prohibitive cost, right? Therefore, in such projects, we simply go with predictive, which is called waterfall. Now, why we also call it waterfall is just like waterfall, as the water falls down, it's very difficult to put it back up. It just keeps on flowing. So you need to be flowing from one phase of the project. Do it once, move to the next one. Do it very well, do it complete, and do it once, then you move on to the next phase. By the time you reach the last phase of the particular project, you're done. You should have your deliverables in place. And remember, waterfall does not support changes, minor changes. But if you go for a sizable change, you are asking for trouble. Imagine a situation. I've got this huge building being constructed, and after, it's a 50-story building, and after, say, 20 stories being constructed, I begin to realize, hey, wait a second, these rounded balconies don't look so cool. We need to have those typical rectangular ones. Can you do it? Yeah, of course you can do it. But can you imagine the cost? Just the balcony correction or change will actually be a couple of times the entire cost of the project. Now do you understand? It's very prohibitive. In such projects, you have very strong upward planning. You'll spend months in planning before you'll just spend a month in construction. Or maybe more. I'm just giving you an overall time layout. That means we spend a lot of time in planning. True? That's called waterfall. That's called predictive. Having said that, there are times when we have to come out with R&D projects. For example, do you wonder exactly what methodology would these companies like Pfizer, the Indian very famous the Bharat vaccine, how did they come out with a new vaccine? They had so many trials and errors. And some of the vaccines are doing very well. Some of the vaccines are actually getting banned because of the side effects. So what are the cycles they went into? It is definitely not waterfall life cycle, because you could not have the entire requirements. We don't even know what the vaccine would look like at the end, right? We don't even understand the virus very well. So how do you do it? Which kind of development life cycle do you go ahead with? And that's where iterative comes in. A lot of people, especially the old school R&D people, if you talk to the Pfizer people, I've consulted them, the Indian branch, of course, I've consulted them, and the first thing that you talk to all these scientists over there, they talk about a life cycle which is called spiral. It is nothing but iterative, but old school people still call it spiral. Why do they call it spiral? You see, just imagine, in the beginning, they're trying to understand the virus. They play around with the virus. Can you deactivate the virus? What are the different combinations of things which can deactivate a virus and separate it from the human cell without harming the human cell? Right? Of course, I can take a nuclear bomb and blast the virus out of the place, but then what happens to the human race? So the answers are not that simple. We cannot give you medicines which can actually harm your body just to kill a virus. Right? So be careful. They worked very hard. They did so many trials and errors. So that was the very first project, that can this virus be handled? Do we have any stuff a combination of which can actually defeat this virus without affecting the human body? And then they took and when they found it to be successful, they realized, okay, now we are going to come out with a next project. So we just call it an iterative phase. Now I'm going to increase the scope. So first of all, I tried this testing only on healthy people. Now I'm going to try it on older people, younger people, unhealthy people, people with diabetes. So now I'm increasing the size of my parameters. And can I now come out with a method of actually killing the virus or flushing it out of your body without affecting even the sick people which have other ailments? Then when they were kind of successful, they say, okay, now can we put this virus in an inactive form and increase the antibodies of human beings, or basically living creatures, by deactivating and without making them too sick? That became a very longish kind of a project. When they were successful, they realized, yes, there is a serum in which they can actually deactivate a virus, and then they can actually inject it in people. And it seems to work on independent tissues, live tissues. But then can we put it into a live human being or an animal being? So they did some animal testing. They found some good success. So all of these stages are different projects. I think you get the picture. Right? And the very last is clinical trials, and then approval by FDA, and then it's handed over to operations, and manufacturing starts, operations start, and then we start implementing doses. This entire life cycle is called spiral because every phase is a project, and then we wait, and depending on what happened in the first phase, we'd say, okay, what should we do in the next phase? Do we change something, or should we go back to the drawing board? Right? That did not work out very well. There is no releases. Do you realize between these two phases, right? There is no release. Nothing goes out. It's just work in progress. We're just increasing the scope as we understand things better. With every little success, we increase the scope. How do you think the first Tesla cars were created? Think about it. It was not a waterfall. It was not agile. It was not incremental. It was iterative. Any new product development, any new R&D, where the requirements are not very clear, but you have an objective, you will always do iterative. Now here's the problem. most of the people, particularly the way the consultants talk about agile, they feel that iterative is nothing but agile. There are only two things: project management, which PMI does, which is waterfall. People think waterfall is PMI or predictive, and then there is agile. That's the only two things people know, and that's the reason why people are messing up big time. Agile is just one of the methodologies, and it is not iterative that we just discussed. Then the question comes, let's take another example. You are trying to set up a huge factory in, let's say, one of the places in India or Thailand or US, and because of this COVID crisis or because whatever the situation is, the funding is not very, straightforward. So what do? Let's say you want to start with steel plant. You want to set up a huge steel plant, and in doing that, you've acquired the land, right? So the very first step that you did was acquired the land, put it in your name or your organization's name, right? Procured the funding for buying that land and everything, got the legal document in place, right? You have the legal team in place. And then what did you do? You said, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a boundary wall around it, make a couple of gates on all the 4 cardinal points, east, west, north, south, and put some kind of a tower and appoint the security staff for that. So that's the next iteration. So you're doing it in iterations. First you bought the land, planed it, made it, absolutely simple, made it plain, made it available so that the construction could happen. Then you're putting the boundary wall around it. That's the second iteration. Now, after that, you think, okay, the funding is not there. Let's wait for some time. Let's talk to the government of India. Let's talk to the local stakeholders. Let's talk to the local municipal bodies. And let's look at getting a road, being brought in towards this. That's not your job. That's the job of the municipal body. So you work with them and finally convince them, and they do a partnership with you to partly funded by you, partly funded by them. And then you work on a project to construct a road. Now that is the third iteration. The road is constructed, you can get your trucks there. Now you don't have the funds, nor the government is ready to give you funds for building up the entire plant in one shot. So what do you think? You think, let me do one thing. My particular steel plant would need to have boilers and furnaces, so let's put them in place, the beginning. And what I'm going to do with these boiler plants and the furnaces and all, I'm going to start producing steam that is going to propel and, the turbine to generate electricity, because I need electricity, tons of it for my plant, but the plant is not there. So I'm going to sell this electricity to the government. Revenue. So part of that funding can be done through generating electricity and giving it to the government. At the same time, one part of your project, the whole thing is ready. Second, you could also have a gas plant, because a steel industry needs a lot of different kinds of gases to be used. So you can say, okay, I'm going to start producing gases, and one of the gas being oxygen, I'll make the medical grade, put just a small converter, made it into a medical grade, and sell it to all the medical facilities, because that's in demand right now, that's in short supply. So it is also going to partly fund the project. What do you think this is? You are trying to build this entire project iterative by iterative. Now here is the beauty about iteration. Once you built the boundary and then you realize, I'm going to do something. So instead of constructing a quarters or construction of major machinery or something, or the conveyor belt, you decide, I'm going to first work with boilers and this thing, which is going to produce steam, which is going to produce electricity, and then that will help me fund, a part of my project. So there are changes. And based on that, you can have the next iteration after a few months when you have enough funds, and that new iteration does not have to be planned, in the very beginning. You could have then planned just before that iteration, freshly estimated. You can even change the design, right? Because now as you're slowly, iteratively progressing into the project, you begin to understand the lay of the land better. You begin to understand the environment better. So you change the design. It rains a lot, so I'm also going to have a rain harvesting, and at the same time, the roofs will not be flat. They'll be now shaped and the water would be channeled out. So you can have better understanding, and each iteration could be freshly estimated, freshly designed. It could change as long as the overall scope doesn't change. Now, some of you may say, Manish, that's basically what is agile. Absolutely not. That is incremental. After each iteration, there is a deliverable, but there's a catch. What you need to understand here is agile does not include incremental. In incremental, there is no retrospective change. That means something that you've delivered, it is very prohibitive to make changes in that. We can make changes in the iterations which are about to start, but we can't make retrospective changes. That's the reason why it's a separate life cycle. Egyptian pyramids were made in incremental manner. Sometimes it took two different dynasties or two different kings and sons and daughters of the kings to then their sons and daughters to make one single pyramid. That's a perfect example of incremental, right? I think you get the picture. So it's old. It's not something what you think is agile. Today, the way consultants talk about agile as if incremental, iterative, everything is agile. Absolutely not. Most of the time you implement incremental when you have fund issues or you want to take steady steps. Even though the requirements are clear, you take steady steps to understand the lay of the land or basically what happens, right? Basically, if I be very honest, incremental was the doorway which further led to agile in the 21st century. Let's put it this way. I've done so many incremental projects in the 90s, right? So you cannot imagine. Whenever we did even ID projects where we wanted to be very circumspect, we wanted to be very careful, we went for incremental. That was not agile. All right? So now let's talk about agile. Now remember, in iterative, in between phases, in between iterations, there is no deliverables. Remember, one iteration is one entire life cycle, right? Waterfall life cycle, literally waterfall life cycle, one iteration, right? So when you talk about iterative, there's no deliverable in between iterations, right? There's no deliverable that goes out. It's an internal deliverable. The only time you get the complete deliverable that makes it functional is at the end of the entire project, which is called spiral. At the end of the spiral, you get a deliverable. R&D kind of project. But when you talk about incremental, you are supposed to have deliverable at every end of the iteration. But you cannot have a retrospective change. Of course you can. It'll be too prohibitive, extremely prohibitive, right? So that's incremental. Now comes agile. The best definition of agile and what you should understand is when you want to implement iterative as well as incremental characteristics in a project, then that's called agile. Agile is a combination of incremental as well as iterative put together. That means you can have deliverables at the end of each iteration and also go for a retrospective changes and forward changes. Every single iteration would have to be now, let's say, re-estimated. The changes can be done enormously and it does not affect, you do not really have to come out with a change request. The way the backlogs, the way the requirements are collected and reprioritized, the changes will get implemented in the future iterations. That's what is called agile. That's the reason why you need to know the difference between these methodologies. I hope in this particular video I have been able to clear once for all the difference between these iterations. It is so irritating that I talk to or come across some of the most respectful agile professionals, right, and practitioners, and when I ask them that, hey man, how do you think you can apply agile in construction? And the first thing they talk about is incremental, right? So that means the pyramid guys, the people in Egypt, they used agile. That's absolutely incorrect. It was not at all agile. It was incremental, where one single iteration was a very fixed, well-designed waterfall project. And then they would re-estimate the next project, which is the next iteration. Nevertheless, waterfall. So you need to understand the difference between all of these. Now, I'm going to end this video to explain to you one more thing. Because of this understanding, because of now you know that Agile is a combination of incremental as well as iterative, it cannot be applied to any other industry other than IT, not even telecom. Only the software portion of telecom, not even the VLSI or embedded version. So understand, it is only a software thing. But today people are saying Agile can be implemented anywhere. That's so ridiculous, right? So don't fall for that overhype. I've even seen construction guys getting trained on Agile, and then they wonder, how the hell do I apply it in actual construction projects? You didn't have to. It is just that the consultants wanted to sell, make a sale over there through hype. Don't fall for it. Agile is important provided you do it for the right projects. I even came across a company, I'll not name it, where I was consulting, and I found that these guys were using Agile to implement government regulation. They were about to be put as non-compliant. How can you give deliverables, intermittent deliverables, that I'm this much compliant, that much compliant? That's government regulation. It is very clear and has to be delivered in one shot. It has to be waterfall, nothing else. If you do that, you might actually be non-compliant to one of the laws of the land. Do you know how serious that is? That's what people are doing. Don't fall for the hype. Stick to reality. That brings us to this channel where we make Agile practical, applied. And of course, with the information that you have, you can even ace any of the examinations that show up for Agile. I'm not making this channel specific to any specific certification, no. We are more of a practical people, but yes, I do understand that's also something that you'd like to do, is to certify, and I can guarantee that whatever we tell you in this particular channel, you will be able to certify irrespective of which certification you're talking about. Remember, it's a methodology, not an alternate to project management. With that, let me end the entire discussion right here. It turned out to be a little longer video, but I think it's all for good. Keep watching, keep coming back, subscribe to this particular channel. Even though this is the very first video which is over there, there's going to be a lot more where this came from. Okay, so subscribe, do share, and let you know one thing about PM Pulse: we never advertise, so we depend on good people like you, like-minded people like you, to share videos, to share this link, let other people know about the existence of this channel. All right, with that, take care, catch you next time.